DPAC, Disabled People Against Cuts, they've tried to storm Prime Minister Question Time. They were in there in their wheelchairs trying to go, and there was more police with machine guns, and they kettled the disabled in their wheelchairs. There was physically removing some, and they've occupied the lobby.
Norman, you might want to explain first of all what the shouting is in the background.
Yeah, there's probably more action going on out here than there is in the Commons chamber. There's been a protest by a number of disability protesters here inside Central Lobby because of their anger.
I'm sorry? You have to stop. You can't film with this going on in the background.
You're not allowed to film this. Why not?
Because it's part of the rules and conditions of you using this area that you're not allowed to film.
As you can see, we're not allowed to film here, so unfortunately I'm going to have to terminate this call.
I'm Greene, member of the campaign network Disabled People Against Cuts and manager of Disability Action Islington. So what we're seeing essentially is the stripping away of all the traditional forms of support that disabled people could expect. And we should contextualise it by saying that on average, as a rule of thumb, disabled people going into this period of austerity pre the financial crisis, on average, most disabled people got nowhere near the support that they were entitled to and should have got. And that's the people who got any support at all. Less than half of disabled people who required support didn't get it, got it. Disabled people were half as likely to be in work, less likely to own your own home, less likely to go on holiday or go to university, less likely to have a pension or savings. So we were starting from, a long way back anyway. And then the nature of impairment means that you interact with those public services more. So whether it's health services, social care, local authority, whatever it is, the nature of impairment means that you depend on that support in order to give you some sort of parity to exist in the community. And when you start stripping away those support, and it's really widespread because it wasn't just local authority. It's the voluntary sector, it's self-organised groups, it's advocacy, it's all of these things. And I don't know if you remember, but right at the beginning of the coalition, they had something called the bonfire of the Quangos. And that was a really kind of cynical move because what that was doing was before the impact of the cuts came, they were targeting the possible channels of response. And they were saying, okay, well, these are the vehicles that people might actually come together around, and this is what exists to give people a collective voice. So let's take them out before we start to roll out these cuts. And that's what they did. And when they started then targeting the voluntary sector, local authority, and all those community groups and other places where they took support out, there was nowhere to turn. So people were isolated, they were atomized, they were very much kind of lost in singular identities within their own communities, and their worlds were shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller and smaller as different avenues of support were whittled away. And now what we've ended up with is we're probably not even halfway through the whole programme of what this kind of Tory party taught up in the 13 years they were out of government. And they were fearless. Like, let's absolutely recognise what they did. They spent their 13 years out of government absolutely targeting everything. And if you look at outside of disability, if you look at the range, student loans, the land registry, forestation, there is no sacred cows and no holy ground for this government. Anything that is worth anything is in the kit, it is up for grabs. And when it comes to disabled people and public services and the welfare state in particular, what this is about is turning people from absorbers of state support into bottom line, into people who are actually net producing now rather than net absorbing. And it's about whittling away the state, whittling away support for people, at the same time creating conditions which force these people out into work without the right kind of support or the right kind of assessment or infrastructure to be able to do that kind of work. But that doesn't matter because now they're producing rather than absorbing money, and that's what it's about. It's about neoliberalism, it's about deregulation, it's about the stripping away, privatisation of public services. And disabled people were pretty much the first group of people to feel the massive impact And the first group of people, along with probably the students in 2011, the disabled people were out protesting at us very, very quickly. We were at the, we organised, Disabled People Against Cuts came together at the first Tory conference back in government. They came in May, they had the first Tory conference in Birmingham in September, and disabled people were part of that big protest, and Disabled People Against Cuts were formed at that protest. And we kind of knew, we'd seen the Tories before, many of us, and we knew what was coming down the pipe. These guys were, they were rapacious, they were absolutely, they had no moral compass in terms of the harm that they did, and they were very, very skilled at selling a story. They never lost that. And if you look, Glasgow University did a study in 2012 where they examined the mainstream media, print media, over a year, and what they looked for was the words disability and disabled people, and what the other keywords were in all those reported in all those stories. And in 75% of those stories, the words scroungers, fraudsters or workshy was mentioned in the same article. So it was very much a case of the Tories having a policy that they wanted to drive through, the institutions that supported them driving that narrative. And then as a result of that, over the last 3 years, what you've seen is the spike in disability hate crime, which has been, really kind of incrementally fast growing. And people feel, if you speak to anecdotally to any individual disabled person, the ground has shifted over the last few years, whether you're using public transport, whether you're parking your car, whether you're taking your kids into the park, the general environment and, that you find yourself in has changed, and certainly the public feels facilitated by the current climate to actually be more challenging and more that you suddenly have to be accountable for your impairment, for the resources that you require to give you equity, for the support that you need. And not just that, not accountable to the state, but accountable to the public, and that there's no funnel, there's no filter on that, and people actually don't feel like it's the state's responsibility to call you to account. They feel like they can take that on board themselves now and challenge you about the legitimacy of your impairment, the legitimacy of your support that you require. And that's really dangerous, because what we're seeing is that disabled people are being caught in the crossfire from all angles, from the state, from the public, and there's no support there to collectivise, to get back together. The big, massive corporate charities have pretty much sold out. The small, local disabled people's organisations like this, disability rights organisations, have been absolutely starved of funding. So where do people turn? And that's where groups like Disabled People Against Cuts come from. That people go onto social media to create spaces where they can at the very least speak and connect with each other and actually start saying, well, there's something not quite right here. If we're all having shit lives, all our decisions can't be to blame, all our individual choices and circumstances can't have led us here. There must be something structural, and people are starting to put their context onto their lives, and more importantly, the collectivised response now through the likes of Disabled People Against Cuts, Black Triangle, the WOW petition, lots of different forms of resistance now.